So I just finished Aristophanes, and there are three older people and three younger people in the dialogue, other than Socrates. And the three older ones um, are deluded. On the one hand, they're conservative. They defend the status quo. Pausanias defends the legal system and these relationships. Euryximachus defends the medical system and pandering to irrational desires, and Aristophanes defends the arts tradition and free speech. The trouble is, every one of them has a corrupt eros, and they're really undermining the society because they don't love wisdom. They think they do, but their lives depend upon irrational desires. Pausanias, having sex, being virile as an old man, making sure he has a full life by staying sexually active, that doesn't promote wisdom and well being and stability. Euryximachus depends upon people being excessive, intemperate. That doesn't promote stability because it promotes greed, it promotes war for resources. Um, and then Aristophanes thinks trashing Socrates, all in fun, or just trashing people and vulgarizing taste is a wonderful way to realize civilization. That's not helping anything. So none of them want the social order to be overthrown. They don't want the next generation to be rebellious, but they've destroyed it from within. They claim to be respecting the tradition, and actually they're destroying the tradition. They don't even understand the tradition. Okay, so the next speaker is Agathon, and he's younger. And so Phaedrus and Agathon are two of the young ones. And Agathon worships Aphrodite. So he talks about Eros is young and tender and gentle, and Eros loves peace, and Eros would never want to go to war, and Eros binds people together, people fall in love. Okay, so it's so sentimental and it's so sanitized. And what he says is that he also says Aphrodite has every other god wrapped around her finger. She says Aphrodite seduces Ares, and he will go to war for her. And Aphrodite um, seduces Justice, Zeus, and Apollo, right? Reasoning, and everybody worships Aphrodite, and so he's obviously he represents the worship of youth and beauty, and in the Phaedrus, which I didn't mention, but Socrates has a kind of ladder of love in the Phaedrus, where he says physical beauty, the beauty of the body, is the first step, and after that you move up to different ways of life that embody different passions. And so Socrates will say this again in the Symposium in the next speech. But Agathon represents the worship of youth, and he also represents Athens because three of the other people in the Symposium are trying to seduce Agathon, or they're totally attracted and in love with him. So Pausanias, the old guy, and who represents the legal system, um, uh, Aristophanes. No. There's three people vying for Agathon's soul. Pausanias, based on pleasure, And then Alcibiades comes in later because he's looking for Agathon and he wants to seduce Agathon. And Alcibiades represents the drive for power. And then Socrates is also trying to seduce him into loving wisdom. So he is the new Paris. In the Phaedrus, Phaedrus had that choice. He had pleasure, he had power, and he rejected wisdom. Now Agathon is the new sweet young thing, and he has the same choice: pleasure, power, or wisdom. Um, so Agathon clearly worships pleasure and beauty. Well, supposedly he wrote tragedies and he won the tragic contest. But this worldview is anti tragedy. Aphrodite is the most shallow and anti tragic character, goddess in the whole range. She never admits she's wrong. She has no memory. She undermines everybody. And then she says, "Oh, I hate war. It's so bloody and ugly." Well, you're the one who started the war. You're the one who gave Helen to Paris that started the war. She's just so ignorant. So Agathon is the same. He says, "Oh, love is gentle and young and beautiful and virile." And it doesn't occur to him that whatever tragedies he's writing, he's miseducating the Athenians and he's abusing the tradition of tragedy. It's not educating the people, clearly. And then he himself is deluded about the value of his own good looks and beauty and the fact that all the old geezers are after him, and he's got the city wrapped around his finger. But that's a total reversal of values. Physical beauty is the opposite of what of the pantheon of the gods. It's the lowest. It's the least sophisticated, the closest to our biological drives. And we need to make the transition from just physical pleasure to the love of justice, truth, beauty, whatever. So Agathon has lost it, and he represents the younger generation. So far, the younger generation worship war, Ares, and Aphrodite. Okay, so then Socrates comes in, and he gets into a conversation with Agathon. He starts having a dialogue with Agathon, and he says his main points are that love is not a god. This is key. First of all, Socrates starts out by saying, "I wish I hadn't agreed to this because you guys are all telling lies. This is all a big lie. You've learned from the sophists how to give rhetorical speeches and delude other people and deceive yourselves." I mean, he doesn't literally say this. He says it's a lie. You've all made love, Eros, into a god. And Eros is not a god. Eros is a need. We love people because we need them. And we love justice because we need it. We love truth because we need it. We cannot live, much less live well, without constantly pursuing these goals. We have the capacity to seek these things. We should have the desire to seek them because we should realize we're not going to maintain a civilization. We're not going to pass down a self-sufficient society, even a healthy society, unless we constantly, diligently persist in pursuing those goals because we need them. We don't have them unless we are actually actively pursuing them. So Agathon actually seems teachable. He admits he doesn't know, and Socrates shows him that love is not a god; it's a need. And then Socrates says, you know, Agathon, when I was your age, I actually believed that. So I understand. Okay, it's a very powerful point of view. Um, but I had a teacher, Diotima of Mantinea, who had a conversation with me, and she became my teacher. And she told me these things that I'm telling you, that love is a need. And then she told me the story about the ladder of love, how I could grow in love, how I could make that transition from a superficial kind of love to a deeper love. Now, um, now is where I want to point out that this Socrates speech is about his anima, his relation, what Jung would say is anima projection. Diotima was a goddess from Delphi. She did exist. She did, he says, she prevented Athens from being hit by the plague for 10 years. She delayed the plague. Well, that should be spiritually, not just physically. There was a physical plague, but I think he meant that she managed to educate enough people so that the plague of a sick Eros and the consequences of that for the fall of the city was delayed because of the efforts of Diotima, but finally she couldn't do it. The people were too corrupt. So he says, so on the one hand, she is a real person, but on the other hand, he's projecting, Socrates is projecting into her, as he says that every teacher-student relationship, the, the young man finds a lover of Zeus and engages in this transference, and he doesn't, so he loves this man, but he doesn't even know what it is he loves. And he learns from this man how to assimilate the shadow. So, assimilation of the shadow is a relationship with somebody the same sex. Now, the assimilation of animus and anima is in a relationship with somebody, a dialectical relationship, not sexual, with somebody of the opposite sex. And so this kind of a guardian would be a female in the case of a male, or a male in the case of a female. So Diotima is Socrates' guardian and his anima projection. He projects into her and she educates him. And so, okay. So Carl Jung talks about this. He says, the male anima is a personification of all feminine psychological tendencies in a man's psyche, such as vague feelings and moods, prophetic hunches, receptiveness to the irrational, and, last but not least, his relation to the unconscious. So, of course, these sexual drives that are male and female as such are built into the collective unconscious. They're part of the basic primitive drives. And they need to be educated. So Carl Jung, interestingly in my view, has this view of mythology is trying to educate people, educate for animus, anima, and in the case of men, well, he has 4 levels of sophistication in terms of animus and anima education, the maturation of animus and anima. So, at the lowest level, he says it's Tarzan and Jane. You have this extreme difference. The man is aggressive and the woman is gentle. And both of them are totally out of balance. They're at one extreme or another extreme. And so they completely need each other. They're not at all self-sufficient. They can hardly function without each other. This is a kind of relationship that's often abusive because each one needs the other one so much that they can't question them, they allow themselves to be abused, The woman obviously violently abused by a very aggressive man, but the man can get manipulated by a very seductive woman who takes advantage of him. And these are actually the kind of relationships those between the two men that are described by Pausanias and Lysias. Anyway, so at the lowest level, it's Tarzan and Jane. And at the next level, he says it's Helen. It's the appreciation of the beauty of a body, the sort of aesthetic appreciation of physical beauty. So it's more sophisticated than just I want to have sex with her. It's like that's a lot of paintings, sculptures, especially in the Renaissance, were just appreciation of the beauty of the human body as such, the physical body. Okay. The third layer is for a man, the way Jung described it, was the Virgin Mary, who is sacred. She lives for the sake of higher goals, and she's a virgin. It's detached from sex. And then the fourth layer is Athena, the love of wisdom, and that has the most integrity. You've integrated your anima in a way that, so you love a woman for her soul as well as her emotions, her beauty, physical, emotional, intellectual, and her ability to lead, to live a good life. So that's how men have to develop their understanding of women, their ability to relate to women, and that it corresponds to what's inside of their psyche, their anima. Okay, now Socrates also has this ladder of love from less mature to more mature, is what Diotima teaches him. And so I'm just going to quote from what Diotima says. And she does clearly act as his teacher. She says, I will do all I can to help you understand. She begins by saying love is a longing for immortality. Okay? So we know we're going to die, and so we long to live, leave something behind, a better society. But at worst, it's negative attention is better than no attention, some sort of glory, some sort of conquest, wealth, or worldly success, and the story of how successful and rich you got or how powerful you were. That's at the worst, and you have to develop this longing, because it can lead you to violence and irrational behavior, because you'd rather be infamous than just disappear. So what you have to do is, this is the ladder of love. Those whose desire to procreate is and be remembered through is of the body, turn to woman as the object of their love and raise a family. So they leave behind children. But those whose desire to procreate is of the spirit rather than of the flesh conceive and bear the things of the spirit. And what are they, you ask? Wisdom and all her sister virtues. It is the office of every poet to beget them, and of every artist who we may call creative. So this is definitely what Athens was about. The founders, the people who structured Athenian society, wanted people to desire to create something artistic, something that would educate people, some positive, wonderful way to be remembered and for their city to be remembered. Okay. Whoever wants to be initiated into the mystery of Eros must go even higher than that, says Diotima. The candidate for initiation cannot, if his efforts are to be rewarded, begin too early to devote himself to the beauties of the body. First of all, if his preceptor instructs him as he should, and so you have this relationship of mentor-mentee, which is translated preceptor. He will fall in love with the beauty of one individual body, so that his passion may give life to noble discourse. So that's fine to have these speeches, to write about a beautiful body. Just, you're not repressing. There's no repression in this educational system. There's, when you hit puberty, you are attracted to beautiful bodies, and it's perfect. And you need to articulate that, to link eros to logos. Next, he must consider how nearly related the beauty of any one body is to the beauty of any other. When he will see that if he's devote himself to loveliness of form, it will be absurd to deny that the beauty of each and every body is the same. So the point is, you stop wanting to have sex with a beautiful body, and you start just appreciating the beauty of the body as such. So you've actually moved beyond your biological drives to something cultural. Next, he must grasp that the beauties of the body are as nothing to the beauties of the soul. And that's where you appreciate a person who loves justice apart, or truth, or beauty apart from what they look like. And Socrates was notorious because he was ugly, but he had a beautiful soul. So that wherever he meets with spiritual loveliness, he will find it beautiful enough to fall in love with and to cherish. This is where you would have friends who love virtue, and you'd have close friends. And from this he will be led to contemplate the beauty of laws and institutions. This is not any particular law. Some laws are unjust. But the importance of laws and institutions as such to order our lives so that we can actually flourish. They create a structure within which we have some leisure time, and we don't have to fear our security all the time. And when he discovers how nearly every kind of beauty is akin to every other, he will conclude that the beauty of the body is not, after all, of so great moment. And next, his attention should be diverted from institutions to the sciences, so that he may know the beauty of every kind of knowledge. He will find in such contemplation the seed of the most fruitful discourse and the loftiest thought, and reap a golden harvest of philosophy, until, confirmed and strengthened, he will come upon one single form of knowledge, the knowledge of beauty. So, the idea here is that you would appreciate the beauty of science knowledge, and then if you link that to Socrates' recognition that there's a divine mind, that a force that leads everything toward higher and higher levels of complexity and being and flourishing, and how beautiful that is, that the universe is beautiful, and that you would aspire to be a beautiful soul and to develop yourself and become a beautiful person, because that's part of the whole creative process. So anyway, that's how you make your eros mature. And so Socrates gives his speech, and everybody claps. But obviously, Socrates represents the love of wisdom, and that's 2/3 of the way through the dialogue, and it really shows up the other guys, that they worship Ares or Aphrodite, and Socrates is the one that worships Athena, justice and truth. Well, then Alcibiades comes in, and he's roaring drunk, and he's wild and woolly, and he finds out he's going after Agathon. He wants to seduce Agathon. Now, Alcibiades was what Plato calls in the Republic a tyrannical soul. He had all the capacities, the abilities. He was the brightest, that had the most potential for leading Athens forward and upward. The trouble is when you have the most potential for leadership, you can lead yourself in a society either toward higher and higher levels of cultivation and civilization, or you can lead them astray. You can wrap them around your finger and dedicate yourself to power, glory, and pleasure. And that's unfortunately what Alcibiades did. And Alcibiades tells a story, though, about Socrates and Socrates' way of life. And so Socrates is the great lover. He's the man who's driven by Eros. He says, originally, when they were going to talk about Eros, he says, well, that's one thing I know about. It also shows, Alcibiades' story shows that Socrates learned the lessons of Diotima. He did start living for the sake of love, and he did have a mature Eros, which he had to work on. It's just that Diotima explained what he needed to do, and he went out and clearly did it. So Alcibiades says that Socrates was always trying to seduce him, was trying to attract him, trying to get him caught up in the philosophical frenzy, which would be assimilate the shadow. And one night, but Alcibiades thought he was like everybody else. Alcibiades was good looking, and he thought Socrates was attracted to him for his looks. And actually, Socrates was attracted to him and chased him around, partly because he was afraid of him, afraid of what he might do if he doesn't get the philosophical frenzy. So, anyway, so Alcibiades says one night they were talking, and it turned out to be late. And so Socrates said, well, maybe you'll have to stay the night. And Alcibiades was thinking, okay, this is it. He's going to sleep with me. And yeah, so it turned out, Alcibiades says, he just wrapped his cloak around him, and they slept together, but it wasn't anything more than if I were my brother or my father. In other words, there was no sex. And Alcibiades says he was humiliated because he prided himself on his good looks and his ability to seduce people, and he couldn't gain power over Socrates. He couldn't wrap Socrates around his finger. Socrates really didn't care about his beautiful body. Socrates really cared about his soul, and he understood that. And he knew why, too, because he knew Socrates was worried about his capacity to seek power, and he also figured out that, well, anyway, let me just explain. The next step was that Alcibiades decided he could not resist his capacity to wrap the Athenians around his finger and to seek power. And he says every time he saw Socrates, he would feel embarrassed because he knew Socrates was right, that he should pursue wisdom and self-control. He also admired Socrates immensely because he had all that self-control. He could drink with the best of them, but he never got drunk. He could eat and enjoy food, but if he didn't have it, he never complained. He was courageous in war. As a matter of fact, when Alcibiades was a flaming coward, Socrates acted bravely, carried him off the field, helped him out, and Alcibiades got the award, the ribbon for it, the medal or whatever he got, instead of Socrates, and Socrates didn't want it. He wasn't in it to get medals. And Alcibiades knew, he said, Socrates is the most beautiful soul. I realized that Socrates had a beautiful soul, but I just can't resist it. Every time I get away from Socrates and I go to the assembly, I cannot resist just getting them to do whatever I want them to do. And he has what Plato calls a tyrannical soul. He's totally internally conflicted, but he persists. And what happened was he ended up convincing the Athenians they should go to war against this and conquer Sicily so that they could have their food security, and of course that was a bad decision. And then he goes and mutilates the Herms and is not sent to Sicily, which I mentioned in the Lakes. So Nicias has to get sent there, and Nicias didn't think they should go there in the first place. And then Alcibiades would do outrageous things and get kicked out of Athens. And then the Athenians started losing the war, and they knew they needed Alcibiades to inspire them, so they'd bring him back, and then he'd do something outrageous again, and they'd kick him out. And finally, he betrayed them. He told secrets to the Spartans, and he really helped them get defeated. So he took revenge on his own city. So Alcibiades was the other person from the generation of Phaedrus, Agathon, and Alcibiades, and they represent the worship of being brave in battle as a soldier, the worship of Aphrodite, pleasure, and then Alcibiades, the worship of power. So the older generation basically respects the institutions but has completely corrupted them because their eros is corrupt. The younger generation is less tied to institutions. If you just worship glory in battle, you'd be willing, and you know that from Ares. Ares is really violent and arrogant, and he has a double-edged sword. He doesn't respect justice, law and order, and so Phaedrus is dangerous. And Agathon also turns the values upside down. The worship of pleasure as pleasure will destroy the laws and institutions, and everybody knows that because they know the stories of Aphrodite and Ares. These are the biggest threats to laws and institutions of any sort. And then Alcibiades clearly says, in the name of personal glory, he can completely get the city to ignore its own laws and institutions and to do whatever he wants it to do. So this next generation is more extreme than the previous one, but the previous ones planted the seeds. I mean, it's no surprise that the younger generation turns out like that. And Socrates is the only one that's trying to get all of them to turn around toward wisdom. And he engages them in these relationships. He tries to activate the philosophical frenzy. And Alcibiades knows that he's totally rejecting it. The other ones are deluded. They think they have good values. They idealize themselves. They deny the shadow, and they have a very immature anima. They worship physical beauty and physical prowess. And so the Symposium is a good example of where Socrates says, if a society has too much freedom and people abuse it, it leads to social destruction and chaos, and then to being ruled by a tyrant who comes in because everything is so chaotic. And that's exactly what happened in Athens. So the Symposium is just a foreshadowing, but whatever society you have, if you don't educate eros, you're gonna, and if the eros of the people isn't for the most part mature, your society's gonna fall apart. So liberal education is education for character, and you need a relationship between a mentor and a mentee. The mentor has to be mature, and the mentee has to want to become mature. And if you deny that you need that to have a healthy society, you're deluded. And if you refuse to do it, you're going to self-destruct.